Howdy readers, I'm Jason and this is Chapter and Verse. So today, what I wanted to do, so I was just browsing the videos of booktubers yesterday and discovering a couple of new booktubers who I hadn't seen before. And I came across the channel from Marc Nash. And he just seemed like a really smart, savvy reader. It's interesting because from what I can tell, even though we're both literary fiction guys, I think our tastes are pretty radically different. And anyway, I noticed that he had come up with an original tag about a month ago. And it's called the Last 10 Books tag. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. And so I thought I would do it. Question number 1. What was the last book you didn't finish? Obviously, I don't own it because I didn't like it enough to finish it. Well, actually, there are lots of reasons why I didn't finish it, but the last book that I didn't finish was The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. The thing about this novel, right, so we read it in my book club. It is the only book in the book club that I have not finished. It barely even qualifies as a novel, in my view. And in fact, some libraries don't even shelve it in fiction. They shelve it in nonfiction, which is probably more appropriate. It is literally hundreds of pages of a guy moping and feeling nauseous and whining to himself and looking out the window at the rain and feeling depressed. And I mean, it's hundreds of pages of that and nothing else. Nothing else. It's just this strange, dreamlike Portuguese novel about nausea and depression. It's a weird book. But I'll finish it someday. Unlike many booktubers, I do not DNF books. I have an NTF shelf on my Goodreads. Need to finish. On to question number 2. The last book you reread, and it is The Storm by Frederick Buechner. And this is a novel retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest. One of the really fascinating things about Buechner is that he, in addition to being a novelist, a Pulitzer Prize finalist novelist and a National Book Award finalist novelist, is that he's also a Presbyterian minister. And his nonfiction is absolutely wonderful. He has a book of sermons that I just love called Secrets in the Dark. But anyway, this is a book that I taught many years ago. And I want to say my reread of it last year, which was for my other book club, The Holy Fools of Shepherd. I think it was the third or fourth time I think I've read this. Anyway, it's a very slim book, remainder mark there. And it's just lovely. It really captures the spirit of Shakespeare's The Tempest, but it's much more gentle somehow than The Tempest, and it's much funnier. But it's also it's really moving. It's really wise on the subject of religion and regret. Anyway, yeah, it's a beautiful book, The Storm. Now, question number 3, the last book you bought. So it came in the mail today. Actually, Amazon led me to believe that it wasn't going to be here for another 10 days or so, but it arrived today. And that book is fellow booktuber Neil Griffiths' most recent novel, As a God Might Be. So I haven't read it, so I don't know too much about it, but I am a sucker, an absolute sucker for literary fiction that deals in a really responsible, thoughtful way with religion. We live in a world where religion is too easily dismissed by people who know very little about it. And we also live in a world where religious people are too apt, right, to kind of just rest on their laurels and not want to do the work of complicated faith. And they're perfectly fine to walk into a bookstore and buy Left Behind instead of something like Flannery O'Connor or Ron Hansen or Graham Greene. And I think that's a real shame. Anytime a literary novel comes out that deals with religion in a way that respects my intelligence, I'm gonna read that book, and that's why I'm gonna read this book. Question 4: the last book you said you read but didn't. I thought really hard about this, and I mean, going back to grad school, going back to my undergraduate days, and I don't think I've ever done this in the sense that the question means it, right? Like trying to pass ourselves off as being smarter maybe than we are, or more well-read than we are. I don't think I've ever done it. I'm perfectly happy. Well, not happy. I'm slightly embarrassed, but I am perfectly willing to admit to people that I haven't read Moby Dick. That even with all of my college education, I have yet to read 1984. It's embarrassing, but it's true. Question 5. The last book you wrote in the margins of. Okay, so this is something I don't do. I don't write in the margins of books, period. I'm a big believer in those little stickies, those little Post-it, the really strong ones. You have to be careful putting those in Penguin Classics, actually, because if you leave them on the page too long, they'll take the ink with it. I learned that the hard way. But I did, when I wrote my master's thesis on Peter Carey's Oscar and Lucinda and Bliss, I did take some notes in this copy of Oscar and Lucinda. I tend to prize books as objects, and even though we own 3 editions of Oscar and Lucinda. Next question. Question 6. All right, the last book you had signed. I thought this was going to be The Solace of Leaving Early by Haven Kimmel. I have been friends with Haven for a number of years now, and I had some signed copies of her books from way back. But the one copy that, the one book of hers that we didn't have signed was The Solace of Leaving Early. When she came out here a few years ago and gave a reading and spoke to our book club, we read The Solace of Leaving Early for the Holy Fools of Shepherd. I would have bet money that I had her sign our copy of that before she left, but apparently I didn't. So I had to really put my thinking cap on. And so the last book that I had signed was this one here. So this is The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters. And Sarah Waters is a friend as well. And I've known her much longer, actually, than I've known Haven. I've known Sarah for 16 years, something like that. Yeah, I think it was right around the time that Fingersmith came out. It's a long story. It just says, here on the title page, to Jason and Kelly. Kelly's my wife, obviously. With love and best wishes, Sarah. It's a great book. I've read all of her novels, obviously. Moving on. The last book you lost. Now, I'm not sure if I lost this or if I got rid of it. But anyway, but I noticed it was gone after we moved into our current house. And I'm very careful packing up books when we move. I mean, like we'll have a box of books that says hardcover fiction, A to B, trade paperback, religion, C through F, something like this. And anyway, so we got all unpacked. And some months after we'd been in the house, I went to get our collected poems of Sylvia Plath, and I could not find it. And I still, to this day, I can't find it. Now, it's possible that it got lost in the move somehow, but I think what is likelier is that we have all of the poems. Okay, we have original, old classic hardcover editions of the individual volumes, right? Ariel, Winter Trees, was it Crossing the Water? And we even have the Ariel facsimile edition, I think it is, with the ordering of the poems according to Plath's wishes. Very famously, Ted Hughes reordered the manuscript after her death and published it in a different order, published the poems in a different order than she had intended. So I think I probably got rid of the collected poems of Sylvia Plath just because we already had all of the poems in other volumes. So that may or may not have been the last book that I lost. Question 8. The last book you had to replace. So that would be Wallace Stegner's Angle of Repose. Sorry, I keep looking at the screen. And we had to replace it because, like I said, I'm very, very picky about the condition of my books. And my wife was reading this one day, not this copy, this is the replacement copy, and she was eating flathead cherries. This is when we lived in Montana. And one of the cherries, she bit into it, and it just exploded all over the page. And I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified. And she was a bit shocked at it when it happened. And she tried to convince me that we didn't need to replace it, but there was no not replacing that. So Wallace Stegner's Angle of Repose, just a beautiful novel. If you haven't read this, if you have any sense of kinship with the West, and you haven't read Angle of Repose, you need to read Angle of Repose now. So whatever book you're reading right now, put it on hold and order this and read this. Number 9, the last book you had an argument over. Now, I can't remember having an argument over a book, actually. However, some years ago, I want to say, we might not even have been married yet. My wife and I might have still just been engaged. But we were probably married. We had an argument on the highway, a 90-minute long argument, passionate argument about which film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice was better. And she put all of her chips in for the old BBC miniseries with Colin Firth, which is great, don't get me wrong. But the Joe Wright version had just come out, or had recently come out, with Keira Knightley. And we had gone to see it, and I love that film. I absolutely love that film. Now, some people knock it, say that it's got too much of a kind of Bronte feel for an Austen film. There's a little too much kind of Wuthering Heightsy going on. There's a little too much Heathcliff maybe in that version's Darcy. But I just think it's that movie's where it's at. And part of me feels like I can't imagine a better film version of Pride and Prejudice being done. Anyway, last question, number 10. The last book you couldn't get hold of. And I assume that means difficulty tracking down to buy or to check out. And the last one we had real problems with was a few years ago. In our book club, we read, I got to refer to my notes here, Beauty on Earth by Charles-Ferdinand Ramuz. That was a really tricky book to get hold of through interlibrary loan. We ended up getting it from some really obscure academic library, maybe on the East Coast or somewhere in Michigan, and it ended up being not a very good book to boot. So I would like Neil Griffiths, whose book came in the mail today, to do this. I would be really interested in his answers. And Jasmine from Jasmine's Reads. Those two are probably currently my favorite booktubers. I just can't wait for their new content each week. So, and Neil's actually he hasn't put anything out in a while. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.